So, Kathy, you're well known as somebody who's written a novel about St Cuthbert, and later this summer you're going to be leading a study tour in his footsteps. How did you first get interested in Cuthbert?
I think Cuthbert has always been there for me. I grew up in the northeast of England, in Northumberland, and in that part of the world, Cuthbert is very much a presence still. When I was a kid, we used to go to the Farne Islands, and I knew where St Cuthbert had lived there. I went to St Cuthbert's church. I was even in St Cuthbert's house at school. So Cuthbert was always there for me as a kind of background, a benign background presence. But I think I didn't really become interested in finding out more about him till later, and it was in fact in London, not in the northeast. I was waiting for the 2 o'clock at King's Cross, and I decided to go into the British Library, which is just beside it. And I went to have a look at the Lindisfarne Gospels, which they keep there, which was a wonderful experience. But they also have some objects that were taken from Cuthbert's tomb when it was opened in the Victorian period.
Gosh.
They have his travelling altar, a little travelling altar he used to carry with him when he went evangelising in the Northumbrian countryside. They have his pectoral cross, a very beautiful golden garnet cross that he wore as a bishop. And they have his copy, his personal copy, of the St John Gospel. It is perhaps one of the oldest books in England. It dates from the 7th century. And seeing these objects that had been personal to him, that he had read this copy of the St John Gospel, that he had worn, he'd used these things, suddenly he became a real person for me, not a background presence.
Yeah.
And it was like a meeting for me, and it made me want to know more about this person, and I also felt I might want to write about him.
Goodness. So, how does one go about researching somebody who lived so many hundred years ago? I mean, what is the evidence or the historical records for him?
Amazingly, there's quite a lot, and this is really due to something that happened after his death. About 11 years after his death, his fellow monks wanted to move his relics from the graveyard on Lindisfarne into the church so they could be venerated more easily. When they opened the tomb, they had a huge surprise. St Cuthbert was lying there as if he had been buried yesterday. His body was uncorrupt. He was smiling. His vest, his clothing was as fresh as new.
Goodness.
And it was obvious that a miracle had taken place. The next best thing to his resurrection, really. And his cult as a saint was really established from that moment. And every cult needs a hagiography, needs a life of the saint. And they went to the best known scholar of the day, who was the Venerable Bede, and asked him to do it. And Bede used eyewitness records, because there were still lots of people alive who remembered Cuthbert. And it's full of life and colour. It's a very good read, and we find out lots about Cuthbert and about the times he lived in.
So what sort of picture does one get of Cuthbert the man from Bede's accounts?
He comes out as a very attractive person, really. It's interesting that his first job as a monk was as a guest master, so he was obviously a people person. Bede describes him as being affable, that he was always cheerful, he loved to laugh. People also felt they could talk to him. Cuthbert was the person you went to with your problems. He was also a peacemaker. At the time he was living, there was considerable discord between the Roman and Celtic branches of the church, and Cuthbert was a reconciler. He helped to reconcile the problems between the two branches of the church. And perhaps another attractive aspect is his very close relationship with the natural world. He's known in the Celtic tradition for his love of animals. there's a nice story of him visiting a monastery at Coldingham, which is a bit further up the coast. And one of the monks saw him creep out of the monastery late at night and followed him. He went down to the sea, entered the sea, and stood up to his waist for many hours praying. And when he came out, 2 sea otters followed him, and they dried him with their fur.
Oh.
I think it also tells us something about his asceticism.
Yes.
That he, praying several hours in the North Sea, would finish off most of us. And it's clear that he was a very strong man as well.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone would have survived 8 years on the Farne Island who wasn't pretty tough, actually. Yeah.
So, in a few months you're going to be leading this tour. Could you tell us a little bit about, what the programme will be, what it will include, how much of the things that you've already talked about will one have a sense of on this tour?
Well, we'll start off in Lindisfarne, very much in the footsteps on Lindisfarne, with bead in hand. We'll visit the Farne Islands, and we'll also visit St Cuthbert's Cave, where traditionally his body was laid when the monks fled from Lindisfarne, from the Vikings. And we'll have that wonderful opportunity to be on the island when the tide comes in and the tourists go, and you have that opportunity to have the very special atmosphere of the island. So I think that'll be a lovely part of the visit. And then we'll go down to Durham. We'll stay close to the cathedral, and that part of the tour will be looking at Cuthbert's legacy, how it is that we still have so much of Cuthbert with us, how he went to Chester, his body was taken to Chester Street and then to Durham, and so we'll be visiting and walking between those places.
I notice in the publicity here that that you emphasise that the tour is open to people of any faith and religious background. Why is that important?
I think this reflects an important aspect of Cuthbert, particularly for the North East. Over the centuries, Cuthbert has been understood as the protector of his people. And he's very much tied up with the spiritual identity of the North East. And I think that aspect, that compassion for his people, is something that is perhaps beyond any particular religious doctrine. I think for people in the North East, there is a sense that Cuthbert is their saint, that he is there for them, and people visit the shrine, interestingly, in increasing numbers. Over recent years, his shrine at Durham Cathedral has grown and grown in popularity, and I think he is still there for us all.
Well, thank you very much, Kathy. Thank you.
Thank you.